Hello, everybody. Welcome to DiverseWorks Presents Anti-Black Racism in the Arts, a panel discussion. My name is Rachel Lavelle. I am the Executive Artistic Director of DiverseWorks Dance Company. I am here from the Registry Theater in colonial Kitchener, Waterloo. This is a territory of the traditional Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and neutral peoples. Really a stolen block of land 6 miles on either side of the Grand River called the Haldimand Tract. Something that I am sad that I didn't realize as a person born onto these lands and had to educate myself about as an adult, really in recent years. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. Also, coming from a history of slavery through the North American slave trade, coming from the oldest colony in Barbados and settling here on Turtle Island. I'm going to introduce you to our panel, and let's go from the top, starting with Laura May. I'm just going to have you all give yourself a little introduction to our beautiful audience, and away we'll go.
Hello. I am Laura May. I don't even know how I'm coming into this. Isn't that hilarious? When you wear so many hats, Black folks wear so many hats. So as I decide who I am to engage in this discussion, I know all the other panelists are like, yeah, that's right. Why? Who? Anyway, the point is this. I am the member of Provincial Parliament for Kitchener Centre. But I'm also a Black mom of Black children in an anti-Black world. And I just want to put that out there because I think it's important. I'm a former artist from many, many moons ago before being elected. And I'm trying to raise Black artists in a way that will allow them to thrive and not have to jeopardize, or not jeopardize so much as sort of limit their engagement in the arts because of the realities of what you get when you put art that pushes boundaries into the universe. So those are all of my things. And sorry that I came in so, but there we go. It's that kind of panel, babies.
You're good. Welcome. We're just here. All right, let's go on to Salam.
Hi, y'all. I'm Salam Debs, and I am a mother of a 16-year-old boy who is deeply in the arts, who wants to go into film and media and editing and visual arts or visual effects. And I also grew up singing, songwriting, thought that was going to be my trajectory in life for sure, growing up. And, some systemic issues changed my trajectory of my life and moved me in a completely different direction, where I had to walk away from the arts really to go into the corporate world to raise my son as a single mother. And then, which for many people, anti-racism education is usually not a choice for Black folks. You come to this work because you're kind of forced into it. So I teach anti-racism. I'm also a yoga studio owner, so I teach yoga and meditation, which I feel is very deeply part of the arts. And finding my way back into the arts in a way that allows all of these intersections of who I am to intertwine, that I don't have to separate it. So I feel really grateful to be here and have this real honest conversation.
Thank you so much. All right, moving along to Queen. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you, Michelle, for having me. My name is Queen, pronouns she, her, and happy to be here on the lands as we know as Tadina Done. Many may know as Guelph, today to colonization. And yeah, what brings me here? I feel the same way. We all wear so many hats, but this discussion on arts has been really important to me. I'm a graduate from the Randolph Academy for Performing Arts, but the same kind of story, I had no choice but to start investing myself in the world of anti-racism and how art and activism made this kind of beautiful world of artivism where I could share stories as well as heal. And I think also heal our ancestors as part of that kind of journey and exploration in that. So really happy to be with these wonderful panelists today and just excited for the wild discussion we have. I wish I brought my flag though, so that in case something came up I had it ready, but
you can go get it if you need it, honestly.
I might just need to like, bring that down. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me. And I mean, of course, I mean, look at everybody's little blurbs. You see everyone's like, everybody has so many hats. And this is just the reality, I think. So thank you all for highlighting that. I'm going to move across to Kevin. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin Ormsby. And in hearing already the panelists, I feel rather privileged. I've been in the arts now since I was 3. That was 43 years ago. I'm still in the arts. And I've been dancing for 36 years. So I'm really honored to be here and also bring into focus that the entire Caribbean and Americas is indigenous land. And so Barbados, that was mentioned, is Ichura Guamanin. It's an Arawak word, and that I'm from and originally born in Shamaka, known to you as Jamaica, which is a Taino land. And so when I begin to look at these things, I begin to look at the historical context of colonization and its impact on Black folks and Black bodies, and how we move through different spaces and still intersect with anti-Black racism in different ways. The work that I do primarily with my company, Kasha Dance, is very much rooted in research in the Afro-contemporary expression through the African diaspora. But I've also worked in the arts sector in equity, diversity, inclusivity training for arts organizations across the country. And so to be a part of this conversation wearing both hats is a privilege and a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. And last but very not least, we've got Natalie. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone out there. Thank you. I am Natalie Sebastian, and I am also streaming live from the Registry Theatre. So thank you, Ray, for acknowledging. That's great. I have been around forever. I'm 102, but I look really good for my age. So I have been in theater and film for a long time. I dare not say how long, but I have been in doing theater and film for a long time. And I have seen it all. I have done many, many things. And I'm so excited to be on a panel that that has a lot of experience and a lot of things to say. Excited about that.
Absolutely. Oh man, yes. Everybody here I feel so much respect for, so much admiration for. I've seen you all doing the work that you do, and that's really what wanted me to bring you all together. So thank you all for your time. And really, to the audience, it's because of leaders like this and people who are doing the work that I exist in the space. I believe that I've had a pathway paved for me in order to be able to even be in an executive type of position. And really, it's because I appointed it to myself. So that's where we're at, with a lot of encouragement from these fine folks who said, just do it, honey. Just do it. And I did. So here we are to have a discussion amongst a panel of folks who all have experience within the space, who have some lived experiences, know people in the space, work in the space regularly. I wanted to talk a little bit first about each of your organizations and what they do, and why. Why do you do the work that you do? Can I start with Natalie? Natalie is actually my childhood ballet teacher and the first educator who was a person of color that I ever had, and one of the only educators of color that I've ever had in the industry. And actually, I didn't know that she was a person of color until she told me. By nature of her biracial experience and identity, very similar to myself, but a different level of melanin, I believe, presenting to the world what the history is there. So, Natalie, please go ahead.
Well, what do I do? Oh my goodness. I I perform, act, sing, and dance. I currently have a company called On Point and Just Dance, which is a dance competition, which I started many years ago while I was doing theater. I have performed at every major theater here in Canada, and I'm very I'm excited. And I switched a few years ago to film and TV. Because not all roles are offered to someone like me. So it's a very interesting thing being perhaps not Black enough or not white enough. So I started a side business like everyone else. We always have to have side businesses. And just recently, Ray has asked me to help her with a dance company called DiverseWorks, which I'm so thrilled to be a part of. It is exciting to be dancing. It's exciting to be filming work. It's exciting to be part of something. And it's also very exciting because I'm older, I'm almost 60, so to hear other people talk about their experiences, and a person who is a little bit older, we tend not to say so much. We kind of take it in, and we just learn to zip it, and listening to people's experiences and things that have happened along the way to myself in theater and some of my experiences. It is super exciting to work with Ray and listen to her thoughts and her views of different things. So so that's a little bit about me. I came here when I was 3. My father is from South Africa, a Black South African person, and my mom is Dutch from Holland. I speak a couple of languages, and that's, and I have 2 children who are the love of my life and the bane of my life. So if my kids are watching, please put the dishes away today.
Thank you, boys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine I'm going to hear a lot of this echoed amongst a lot of you, the need to sort of do your own thing because of a lot of the barriers in the way. But before we get further into that, I'm going to toss it over to Salem to hear about your organizations and why you decided to make them.
Yeah, I think, for me as a single Black mother, Ethiopian mother, and kind of going through that intergenerational, experience of my mother traveling, my mom and dad coming to Canada as migrants, as immigrants from Ethiopia to Sudan, from Sudan to Jordan, from Jordan to here. I think that my upbringing of not having access, of having all the systemic barriers, and then trying to make it in the corporate world, trying to work as hard as you can to get upward mobility, never feeling like I could, led me to the point where I was like, you know what, you just need to do it on your own, because at this point, you don't really fit into any of the spaces that you're trying to be in. And so that led me eventually to getting to this place where I became an entrepreneur and opened up my own, yoga studio, started teaching yoga, and then opening up the studio eventually with zero money, zero funding, zero support, and finding a way to happen. And now when I look back at it, it's pretty wild, because you're like, do I have enough money for groceries, or do I have enough money for gas this week? But I felt really like that was my only way to be able to kind of take my life back into my own hands. And that led to, me looking at the ways in which, firstly, in the yoga and the meditation space and resting and wellness space was really white and really had no representation. And it bothered me. It bothered me, the fact that I had no representation of that practice. And so I started to kind of advocate in those spaces, which led to, doing anti-racism work around spiritual bypassing and decolonization of these practices, which led to educating and doing work within, schools and organizations, and teaching about anti-racism and teaching about the ways in which so much of what we want to do in the world as Black people, we often we always have to face the intersection of not only, for example, for me being a woman, being a Black woman, being, a child to immigrants, all of these aspects, being queer, all of these aspects intersecting, being a single mother. And so, I think when I think about the arts and I think about the work that we are all kind of involved in some way or another. Like I think about Laura May Lindo, and even though she's an MPP, it's like, but she's an artist. That when you're around her, that she brings that creativity. And I think about all of you, I know that you are all artists. And I think it reminds me of the quote by Toni Morrison, where she says the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. And so sometimes I always make the joke that, like, imagine what I could do if I wasn't always fighting anti-Black racism on a daily basis. I'd have 3 albums out right now. Okay. I'd be
right.
painting, I would be doing some amazing things. And, I'm moving in that direction and trying to reclaim that. But it's a struggle. Like when you are an entrepreneur and you are also, like all of us, at the intersection of anti-racism, has to be at the forefront of what we do for survival.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to echo on that, the whole reason this event exists is because in trying to create this company and trying to plan for having a company existing here for what I wanted to do, I experienced so many barriers and so many issues that it just highlighted that the work isn't done. We need to continue to talk about this type of stuff, and it's so apparent. So show of hands if you started your business because you were the only one and you needed to be in a space that was like for you. So half of us, a good half of us at least. Kevin's like, not me. That never happened. All right, I'm going to toss it over to Laura May, speaking of, to talk about why.
So I'm entering this panel from a slightly different place, right? Once upon a time, I was a musician, like many, many moons ago. I say many, many moons ago, but then I find that because my starting point was the arts, my starting point was singing in a bunch of bands in Toronto, back when I was born and raised in Scarborough. My entrance into everything else was always grounded in the arts. So there's a creative way that I approach problem solving. There's a creative way that I approach these difficult conversations. There's a creative way that I decide that we're going to have some real talk, right? So then you jump ahead to being elected as the member of provincial parliament for Kitchener Centre. And I have the honor of being the anti-racism critic for the province, the colleges and universities critic for the province, and the chair of the first Black caucus in the province of Ontario. So just as an aside, because it's Black History Month, so I'm going to take an aside. It is the first time, in 2018, it was the first time in Ontario's history to have this many Black people elected in a single party. There are 5 of us, 2018. Right? So I'm the chair of this Black caucus. And so that work and that role in the midst of a focus of attention on anti-Blackness in everything, anti-Blackness in work, anti-Blackness in the arts, anti-Blackness in schools, anti-Blackness, has made me have to spend a lot of my time talking about things that nobody else wants to talk about. And so I remember one day, I was at some march. I'm always at a protest. So there's a protest, I was there. And I was at some march and I had to speak. And I was feeling like I was not grounded. And I sang a song for the ancestors, for me. I'm part of a spiritual tradition that started in Nigeria through the slave trade, landed in Cuba, from Cuba came to North America. And I remember when I got to the mic, I just started singing. And so now it's just become this thing that I do. I'm an elected official who sings first because I need my ancestors to be in the space because we're going to have some real talk. And it is a strange combination of things but it makes for a different kind of political engagement, because now the spiritual side of us that comes through the arts, our artistic endeavors, and I don't mean mainstream spiritual, I mean like we are all energetic, we are all beings in this space trying to figure out who we want to become, et cetera, merges with this political apparatus, which is literally created to keep us down. Like it's created to deny our humanity. It's created to block us. It's created to make us focus on this when we should be focusing on that. And so this has become this way of bringing it all together. So with that, I've done some mainstream advocacy for an investment in the arts, making sure that the government hears loud and clear how important it is to invest in the arts. The pandemic created even more opportunities for us to do that. I'm an eternal optimist, so it's a pandemic and it all sucks, and I know that it's a hot mess, my professional opinion. I'm a doctor, so I can provide that. However, there's also an opportunity, because there's an opportunity for us to invest differently, not go back to the old normal that was hurting so many of us, but to go back to something different, like to go to something different. And so some of those things have been part of the work that I do. So while I don't have an artistic organization that I can say I am responsible for or moving forward, I feel like I am bringing arts front and center into the political apparatus, which is kind of cool to be able to do. That's it.
Absolutely.
Done.
No, absolutely. It's so important, because I mean, without political organizing from folks like you, it makes it even more difficult for folks like me to make these organizations. It's because of support from you, and support from Salam, and support from Kevin, and support from Natalie, and support from Queen, that I'm able to sit at this table right now. So thank you for the important work that you're all doing. And I do think it's artistic work, even though it is not necessarily aligned with being performative for monetization. I think that's a Western colonial standard of what art is, and it's not actually reflective of creativity all the time. So in that spirit, let's move over to Queen and talk about some of your organizations and why you do the work that you do there.
Yeah, thank you for that. I also just want to preface that, Laura May, when I saw you sing before doing one of your presentations, that was a game changer in my life, like a very big game changer, because for so long I thought like my political and activism voice didn't have a space in art, and vice versa. So I think those moments like that, where we see kind of like politicians or people who are part of making those big decisions have these normal humanity moments that reflect the way that we can see our world a little bit differently, was so valuable and so important. So I really do want to draw attention to whether or not people think that's like a politician doing this. It just helped me to respond to the work that we're doing and why that work is. And so I think that's kind of where I drew, the same as many. I remember the moment in time when I was at Costco, and I was wearing these earrings that were African shaped, like the country. And this woman came up to me, who I was working with at Costco, and said, "Wow, those earrings from Jamaica are beautiful." And I just couldn't. That was the day I knew. I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. And it was so small, right? Like, it wasn't like, it was a very like microaggression. And she obviously evidently just didn't know, but I was like, I can't be in this corporate world. I cannot have that. And I always think about that quote from Voltan VK, who's an Indigenous artist, that has always said that art progresses culture. And without art, we don't have that evolution, and we don't have the preservation that requires and comes from artists. So that's always really stuck with me as well. So I have two companies. I have the Queen Company, which is like a social media and marketing company, but we've really been focusing heavily in this new year on independent media work. We saw folks like Independent Black Media on social media try and spread all this awareness about Black and Indigenous rights that were happening in protests and land defending. And it really made me realize how little that happens for our community. And so we needed to provide some of those opportunities and shift that framework. Another big conversation for me this year is, while equity, diversity, and inclusion is real cute, it's violence, oppression, and harm. And that's going to be my new focus. It's going to be called VOH training, and everyone's going to be doing it, because I think, you know, our equity boards would look a lot different if we really had this discussion about what violence, oppression, and harm means for communities. And I don't want to negate the way that the Queen Company also tries to enforce joy. And Salam, I believe you spoke about this a bit at the University of Guelph recently, as well as we almost have to shift about what resilience looks like. And constantly we're talking about joy can look like resilience and rest can look like resilience, but why can't rest just look like rest for our community? And why can't joy just look like joy for our community? So amongst all that, I think art in reflection to who I am gives me my space for joy and gives me my space for healing. And I think that that's really important. I have a dance studio as well, reopening back up with some beautiful co-owners, Vanessa and Michelle. And we're really excited for that space. It runs out of the Heritage Hall at Guelph Black Heritage, allowing folks, allies, strong, and our BIPOC and queer community to have an opportunity to connect to a place that is just so inherently important to our culture and preservation, and really important to the art. I think about those moments that they must have been building that space and had to be singing their songs or doing their dances to get through all that hard labor. Yeah. And I think it's important to reflect in those moments as well. I wear several other hats between art and the Guelph Black Heritage as executive director there. But the why really comes down to, like, I just don't want to see someone go through what I went through again and again and again. And I don't want to continuously feel like there's spaces where we don't feel safe. I don't want to feel like we don't have a voice. So in any way that we can make that push, that's what I think we're here to do. And through that, finding that joy, because I'm too tired to keep fighting lately. I've just been laughing through all the things I might find angry or frustrating. I'm like, I'm just gonna laugh it off.
Yeah.
I'll be too tired.
It's exhausting, isn't it, to constantly be holding that energy with you and feeling all of it. But it's difficult when it's so personal to you and you see it happening to you and your friends and your family and your community. It's kind of hard to ignore. So I'm going to throw it over to Kevin, and then I want to circle back a little bit about some of the themes that you guys have brought up within this conversation. But Kevin, I'm curious to know why it is that you decided to engage in the type of work that you're doing and be a quote artivist, as we say.
I'm smiling. I've said this many times that all art is political. And so to have Laura May here is not just because she's a politician, because the very soul of Black lives is an artistic thing. So I'm just going to recenter it a little bit. You know, the work that I do is because I'm a Black man raised in Jamaica, queer, who's been at the feet of Miss Lou. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to circle it back to say that I call my privilege because where other Black artists in this country may not have received support, I did. I'm going to link in some of the reasons why I do the work that I do along the way. My artistic practice is political because I'm political. My body's political. The fact that I'm Jamaican who came to this country with privilege is political. The fact that when, you know, I hear, oh, it must have been hard for you, and I go, no, it wasn't hard for me. The fact that when I realized I was a Black man in Canada and not in Jamaica because I didn't have to question those things. And that Jamaica's motto is out of many one people, where we see those things differently, is the space when you begin to realize that whether or not you liked it, you were gonna be political. And so my work is political. I jump forward to being presented at the Canada Dance Festival and hear presenters say, oh, I wasn't expecting that from my work. And I go, what were you expecting? The first form I started dancing in was in ballet. The African diasporic tradition didn't actually make me unpack my own identity and self until I arrived in this country and started dancing with Dance Carib and with Ballet Creole. So when I say that when I didn't put my hand up, is because I never had that experience. But do I have a responsibility as an artist and an artistic director for people in this country who are arriving in my company? Yes, I do. When I sit in politician spaces in parliament and have the dossier of people where they say, oh, I never knew of Caribbean children and youth dance theater. And I'm like, I'm holding the dossier and they've been around for 25 years. And you are the MP and you had no idea that Black organizations exist. I realized my responsibility. I realize my responsibility when I arrive in spaces like I did as the TAC Cultural Leaders Fellow in the inaugural year. And when they say who you're responsible for, and I said everybody but myself, I realized that my arrival in those moments is going to be political. When I'm awarded a Canada Arts Council Mid-Career Artist Award, because I might have gone through university with a communications political science degree as an artist still dancing, I realize when many others do not arrive at that award, that everything I do in my art is political. When white organizations and mainstream presenters don't understand the multidisciplinary nature of my work, where I'm drawing on art and music and looking at an African diasporic perspective that is not just about dance, but it's about where dance meets every other artistic discipline, my entire existence to this day becomes a political one. Laura May, when we were a part of the David d'Orleans march that ended at Queen's Park, and you sang, and you also spoke about what it meant to work in the region that you're working in and your advocacy, it made my advocacy become even more twofolds. And the reason for me to do the work that I do today. And that's just on my artistic side. Now, on the side with SUPAMO, Cultural Pluralism in the Arts Movement Ontario, was formed by Charles Smith to bring in some of the systemic racism things. This came from a stand firm initiative by the Canada Council, where they stopped the funding from that particular program that was supporting primarily IPOC, or I don't say BIPOC. To be specific in my political activism, I say IPOC because if I do say BIPOC, it's favoring Black over Indigenous presence in this particular land. And so we chose to say IPOC, Indigenous Black people of color. And we're looking at the historical marginalization in that particular way in this particular country. So the moment when SUPAMO was created to support those organizations that are IPOC, coming out of Stanford because they decided that the equity framework didn't need to happen anymore, was the moment I realized that as a program coordinator then, now program manager, that my work was going to need to be fortified into the systemic and bureaucratic ways in which artists and arts organizations are not seeing themselves. And so for me to be on this particular call with Queen, who we presented in our online and hybrid program in December, is magic for me. It's the reason why I do the work that I do, because it then provides and shows that there's platforms out there by Black and IPOC organizations that are supporting the next space and places where other artists and arts organizations need to be. And I don't take that lightly, but I also call it a privilege, because it is the same privilege of that organization and our work tirelessly that is able to provide the resources and support for others within the sector. When I write a grant, and this is a lot, I'll stop here. Y'all get me excited.
Go on, Kevin, go off.
When I, in my privilege, write a grant for a government organization who comes back and say for me to take out a forward-thinking particular portion of that grant, which is about $3,000, because they did not fund software, and that software was funded for operating organizations. I realized the bureaucratic and the systemic racialization of Black arts organizations across this country. You were therefore in that moment scolding me for thinking ahead, thinking into the future, sanctifying it, and saying that if you fund me with equipment, that I would need software to render videos in that particular equipment. And what I said to that particular officer then, you need to step back, get off this conversation, research the company. You will see that at that point, we did not receive operating funding, and that we're not for profit without operating funding. But you will also see that the resilience of and the way I use and draw on my community, a network of community. And you did not think about that as part of this particular funding system. You need to step back, and you need to go and find out who Kevin Ormsby is and also what Kasha Dance do, because $3,000 cannot compare to raising $8,000 GoFundMe to carry a work dealing with homosexuality and misogyny back to Jamaica to be performed. So my financial power as someone who's also queer running a Black arts organization is way more than $3,000. My community, my Black community that supported that particular tour without funding is proof of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna stop there.
That's a good place to stop, and I'm glad that you spoke your truth and you with passion, because that's really why I wanted to bring you all together. I think that not enough people hear this information. The general sentiment that I get from folks is, really? Still? Now? Here? In this country? At this place? And it's like, yep, even yesterday, even tomorrow, even here in this town, even here in this country, these are our experiences pretty much on a daily basis. And I think it's important that we're aware that this is still what goes on. So in that spirit, I want to talk about this. I'm going to call it a trend. I'm just straight up going to call it a trend of inclusion. And what's the difference between inclusion and anti-racism work? Queen, I think I'm going to start with you.
Interesting.
Do we have another hour to spare?
I'm giving this question 50 minutes. Go.
You know, that's so interesting. And I think it kind of brings me back to a point that Kevin was talking about that is really important. And it was brought up in our conversation, Rochelle, on Rogers TV about what folks see as art and what is reflected as art and what is, government grant, all these kind of funders, federal, provincial, and so on. What do they see as art? And is Caribbean and African diaspora art reflected in what they see as fine art, or what does they see as dance, et cetera, and et cetera? And I mean, if we look at inclusion in general, what we've seen over time is we are in the spaces. It's not like our stories didn't exist somehow before. It was just that they were on this like mediocre bottom level of like no importance. Like Mervish, it would be crazy to see something like Once on This Island, which is just such a beautiful, impactful show. And then anti-racism, I mean, the difference really for me is whether people know their place in standing in front, standing beside, and standing behind, and where those positions sit and what they recognize. For me, standing in front of me looks like standing up for situations. Unfortunately, there was a racist situation that happened at our local McDonald's, and people just stood there and said nothing. And to me, that's your opportunity to be standing in front and showing what your allyship or accomplice is a maybe better word or term looks like in the work that you're doing. Standing beside me looks like about the fight that we're going through together, which I hate to call it a fight because it is so damn exhausting these days. And it deserves to also have a space of not having to fight. And then standing behind me, where is your place when we need the voice and we need the energy? Like an equity board, for example, is a really good example of that. I think so often people think they read a book, like how to not be how to be an anti-racist, and they've done the work. And that's not necessarily true. I think for us, when we leave that front door, sometimes we don't know if we're going to come back in it alive. And that conversation has to happen at such an early age. So those conversations have to be happening in your homes too, on how to continue that work outside of just reading a book or just saying you went to this DiverseWorks Presents event and there was Black people on a panel and I heard them speak. And it's like, well, okay, but what are you doing to put that into action? And I'll leave it there and keep passing it on to my panelists on some of their thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, action is so important. We learn about that like in elementary school, actually, though. So it really is like, if you're a bystander, you're also a bully. And I'll Natalie, I saw you put your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love what Queen's saying. I'm gonna read this quote because I can't see without my glasses. So because I wanted to touch on a couple of points that I thought, that you had made there. And I just thought, wow, that's so. I think what some of the issue is, well, anyways, for someone like for me, is that people don't know where to put people. And the quote that I have here, This is just particularly for women, just women. So biracial women struggle with their own identity. We feel an overwhelming outside pressure for racial clarity. And I think that goes throughout. People like math because they can put things in little boxes and they can make it and figure it out. And like how it's very hazy for people to go, okay, this is, you should be in this box, you should be in that box. And how do we make, or how do we bring that, what you said, I believe, is that starting with, community programs, starting that like in kindergarten. Why do we not have more plays coming in? Like, I'm sure that all of us saw something that we just went, wow, that's really, I know I did. One of my very first experiences was seeing a show at Stratford Festival, and lo and behold, many years later I got to perform many seasons there. And if we can bring art to the young people, I think that's going to make a difference too, so that they can see different colors, different avenues, different plays, different music, different dances. And if we can educate children from the bottom up, maybe that'll make, just a tiny bit of like chipping away at that wall.
Yeah, I mean, education is so key, and I think that goes back to what Queen was talking about what is fine art and what type of art are we exposing the kids to, and can they have cultural references to art? And I mean, this goes back to a theme that I hear Laura May talking about a lot, which is removing a lot of the art from our education systems and not having it as something that's accessible or equitable for folks, or not being able to engage in cultural practice of artistic expression. That my reference to being able to dance was the ballet program that was able to be offered at the local dance studio, as opposed to maybe the one Afro-Caribbean workshop that was in the city once a year. So I think that is really, really key. But Laura May, I would love to hear your thoughts as someone who works so closely in this area about education. And
oh, for sure. One of the things that worries me actually is that there isn't clarity about the difference between anti-racist work and diversity or inclusion or equity. Yeah. And so schools have removed funding, like the ministers have removed funding for the arts in schools. We know that that is a huge problem. We need to advocate to get that funding back. But where we also have to be careful is that people will believe that just because you put a bit of funding and you put a racialized art group into a school, that they've addressed racism. And that is not how that works. So for me, anti-racist work is extremely specific. It is an art form of its own. There are tools that you need to be able to do it. There are training things that you need to participate in order to understand how the systems work. There are experts in that area that need to be tapped and supported and valued in order to change the world, because racism is a systems problem. That is not the same thing as diversity. Diversity is a bunch of different people in a room. That happens all the time. Go to the grocery store, different people. You have now entered diversity. Training done, right? Yep. But nothing has changed. You haven't asked any questions about who could afford the, Kellogg's cornflakes versus the fancy sugary cereal, and what the sort of socioeconomic realities are for who it is that can afford this one that's more pricey or the no-name brand. So for me, the anti-racist work is understanding how the systems serve to keep certain people down and allow certain people to thrive. The anti-racist work is trying to wrap your head around how we have Ottawa, folks that are able to spend 3 weeks occupying our nation's capital, and we've got encampments that are cleared within 5 seconds, because at that point the police knew what to do, but at this point they were kind of confused about what their rights were and freedoms, right? And so I know that these are not necessarily things that everybody wants to talk about, and I do believe that the systems want us to just be happy with a dance or a song or a performative expression of Blackness in the spaces that don't see our humanity, I refuse to do that. So for me, it's two separate things. And if we aren't careful and we have those conversations together, then we will in fact be perpetuating the same nonsense. So this panel is about anti-Black racism in the arts. It's not about equity in the art. It's not about diversity, and it's not about inclusion. It's about what racism looks like in the arts. And that conversation is hard, and that conversation requires expertise, and that conversation requires systems changes. Until that happens, then any other discussion about diversity is putting the cart before the horse, if you have horses and carts and you know what that means. But it's doing things in the wrong order. It is backwards, in my opinion.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I will say I was actively discouraged from doing this panel as my first event for my company, because it was like, that's not fun. But is that really what the people want? Are you going to make money from that? But really, people don't want to like listen to like, isn't that a bit political for you to, but it's not a political company. So should you be, and this was the general sentiment from a lot of the folks. And I just think this is why we need to talk about it. This is why we need to have these uncomfortable conversations. It is kind of uncomfortable, especially if you've been avoiding it for your whole life or pretending it's not there. But the reality is, I know my reality is I didn't get to ignore it by nature of it happening to me. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate with, with that. So
can I throw one other little piece in? I know, but I just based on that, I just have to, one other thing. I think that part of why that kind of resistance happens is because people also want to separate discussions about racism and discussions about capitalism. So if I have a company and the point of the company is to make money so that I can blah, 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 capitalism, then you also have to have a discussion about racism and how it appears in those spaces. Because I, as a Black person, cannot make the same choices as you as a white person when it comes to making my company grow and be apolitical. The fact that I own it, live it, am doing it is in and of itself political.
Literally that. Like, I just wanted to make art. I just wanted to use all these skills I practiced since I was 3 years old to like do it, and this is the result.
I'm also encouraged to think like a tattoo is uncomfortable. This work is a necessity. Like that's how, like, I'm just like frustrated when people are like, it hurts. And I'm like, does it? Does it? Because I could show you real pain. This is work is a necessity that we have to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. Salem, I wanna hear your thoughts on this. I feel like you're a little quiet up there, and I know you have a lot to say.
I'm just snacking back here. I'm definitely not quiet. You know me in this topic. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ray.
Yes, exactly. The topic of anti-racism, and speaking of experts and speaking of dismantling systems, tell us about anti-racism, about your anti-racism course, about go off, girl.
I think just to go back to your initial question about anti-racism and to speak to what everyone else is sharing is that, you know, the difference between anti-racism and inclusion, when we think about inclusion, people say they want to create inclusive spaces, but included into what? So what are we asking people to be included into? Are we asking folks to be included into a white supremacist, patriarchal, homophobic, transphobic, capitalistic, ableist society? Because if that's the framework that we're asking people to be included in, then we're just perpetuating the status quo. And we're actually asking Black people to move in those spaces in such a way in which they're continuously harmed, they continuously experience violence, they're tokenized, right? And all of the ways in which harm happens in spaces when we focus on inclusion. And then when we think about diversity, if the question is, we need to create diversity, diverse from what? From what? So what is the standard to which we're comparing, right? And so we have to start thinking about when we say diversity, we're saying that whiteness is a standard, or the patriarchy is a standard, or ableist, mindsets are the standard, and heteronormative mindset is the standard, and everything divorced of that is considered the other. And so what we're doing then is still maintaining this idea, for example, in the arts, that whiteness is the standard to which we have to, the supreme standard to which everything is measured by. And if we perpetuate that, then we maintain the status quo. Whereas what we're trying to do in anti-racism is we're trying to dismantle that. We're changing that. We're integrating policies, practices. We're dissecting it. We're examining it. We're naming it. We're naming dominator culture, right? And we have to look at the ways in which whose perspective, whose insight, whose lived experiences are centered, and whose perspectives are considered the other. And how does that lead to further dehumanization? How does that lead to criminalization? How does that lead to lack of, housing and so forth, and possibility in life? And so I think, that is really the difference. And I think when we think about what Laura May was saying, which is why folks don't want to do this work, is because oftentimes they see themselves as separate. They say, you go do this work over here of anti-Black racism within the arts and talk about this, and we're going to stay over here and just be allies and, just show our support. But I think the reality is when you separate yourself from that, I think the quote by Sonia Renee Taylor, where she says, I don't want an ally because an ally means you came here to help me. How are you helping me solve the problem that you caused? And why aren't I helping you solve the problem that you caused? Why am I not the ally and you the actor? Why is Blackness the responsibility holder and whiteness gets to be the helper? And if we want to move, last thing, if we want to move out of code language, racism, anti-Black racism is not Black history. That's not us. Anti-Black racism is the ways in which white supremacy has perpetuated harm towards Black bodies. And so it's important for us to understand that we place that responsibility back into systems to start to dismantle, look at, examine, the ways in which white supremacy in all its facets are perpetuating violence and harm.
Look here. Mega jump in, we can't. Like you're.
I was just gonna say, Kevin, I see your body needs to bring itself.
Orally, I'm hearing such beautiful things, and I want to start there. I want to also decenter these things in the same way, not from the panelists here. I think you're as Laura May has said, this is a conversation about anti-Black racism, not about diversity, inclusivity, etc. I want to also bring in Salam, what she's saying about the histories of it and where is the root of it and where does it come from. I just want to say, first thing I want to just bring in Bob Marley, because all I hear is that you got tired of in my face. Can't get me out of the race. Then I'm going to move further back. Canada needs to really begin to acknowledge its colonial history. And until it does that, all this stuff we're doing around anti-Black racism and inclusive and diversity will never, ever actually be actualized. But I want to call into being someone that I taught, Raven Wings, who on another panel said, imagine what our ancestors, we would not be here if our ancestors said that they were tired. So I'm taking up that mantle. I'm not tired. I'm going to talk patwa. I'm not care if you understand, because that is language diversity in a country that favors English and French, and those are two colonial languages. And do not in the same breath speak of Matthew da Costa, unfortunately, who came across as a slave and was the first insurgent into Mi'kmaq indigenous cultures because language was his proficiency. And how dare you not, in the history of what we need to be talking about in the structure of anti-Black racism in this country, before we even get to the arts, not acknowledge that there were those two Black bodies that were here from so long ago, or that my country's national dish, ackee and saltfish, was because of a pact, a colonial pact made between Nova Scotia and Jamaica that is still enacted today. Until Canada begin to address these things, this is the reason why, like Laura may say, I'm upset about that what's happening in Ottawa, and that raised $20 million, and some arts organizations in Black and otherwise cannot even raise 10
or zero.
Or zero.
You know how much we raised? $300. Okay. Which I am so very grateful for. I appreciate everybody. Thank you so much. But 300 is still different from 10 million.
And that's when you see that That's when you see how systemic all these things are, when we do not even understand the context of Black histories. Before we get to diversity of Black peoples and where they come from and how they actually are enacting in the Canadian space, we can't talk about that diversity because we're not enough to talk about the histories of the impact of Black bodies on this particular land. And I'm beginning to separate those particular things. And then we haven't been able to get to what is the arts in it and begin to talk about the diversity and the aesthetics of how my work is not like Rachel's work, although it's similar to Queen's work, to the history of how they arrive in space, this space that we're creating in. And I can link it, and we're talking about anti-Black racism in the arts, I can link it to me, Carifesta, the Caribbean Arts Festival. In the first iteration of it, it was a intergovernmental thing between the Caribbean region. When they opened it up to include artists from Caribbean descent in the diaspora, there were 120 artists from this country. We were the only international contingent. And that happened without funding. And when the government funded someone, they funded someone that was not a part of the contingent and then said, oh, but we funded somebody. And all I said was, you missed an opportunity to talk about funding the first diasporic contingent of Caribbean people back to the Caribbean. And what was they say? Oh, were there presenters there? We don't see presenting the same way that you do. We don't see our artistic practices under, as Salam is saying, this white artistic gaze, because we've been envisioning it outside of that. It is rooted in the very systems of how funding and artists and everything that also Laura May has been talking about has been manifesting in this particular country. And nobody wants to talk about it because we're nice, because we want to paint a picture of Canada that says this is what it is, and blah 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 blah, and this is what we want to invite immigration to come into. When you look at a space like Toronto, that's now a majority minority space. But if you look at how and where people of position are who are diverse, ethnically diverse, we still see a disproportionate relationship to whiteness in those space of decision making. I'm gonna look here.
No, 100%. I mean, you're right on the money, Kevin. And I think I see a comment here in the feed discussing about not only diversity in our ethnicities as Black people, but in our disabilities, in our ableist society, our lack of access. I mean, even for this event, I was looking for ASL interpretation. The cost is so prohibitive. It is very difficult to find anybody who is representative of the Black community. I also received emails from these specific people saying that, they frequently have these types of barriers in attempting to even access these types of events. Is there closed captioning that is built into the software and the systems that we're using in order to be able to provide this type of access to information for folks? And it just comes back to how our systems and our society is structured to leave people out and really favor folks who are of the predominant white culture. And that is just the system that it was built on. Oh yes, this is the point as well about the sign language itself being actually racist, and there's a lot of racism in it, so you can't even get around that using that language in attempting to communicate and provide accessibility. So there's still a lot of work obviously to do there, but I want to bring it back to this idea. Kevin, you were talking a lot about privilege, and it's so striking to hear a Black person say the word privilege, because I think that there's a lot of denialism of privilege still happening, or folks who feel like, I worked for my privilege, my ancestors worked for my privilege, and why shouldn't I get to reap the benefits of that? And I think people might be surprised to hear you acknowledge your privilege and claim it as part of your identity. And I want to speak a little bit more to that. I'm going to have you, Kevin, go first, but I want to open it up to everybody as well to talk about this notion of privilege, white privilege, privilege in the arts, and I'm going to leave it there for now. Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, once I started to do a lot of work with SAPAM around anti-racism stuff, and when we some work also in the States, what I didn't share is like I danced in the States for 7 years with Garth Fagan Dance, who's the choreographer of The Lion King, but in his own company, and then I do a lot of work in DC with Dance Exchange, which is a community organized, a dance organization, but working a lot with different sectors and spectrums of communities in developing professional work. And it was one point we were preparing for a racism conference by Race Forward is an American organization who does a lot of race equity work, and someone came up to me and says, "How does it feel to be the only male in the room?" And I was like, "What? Oh, I was just there to do the work." You know what I'm saying? I was just there to do work, but I was the only male in the room. Privilege, because I arrived in that particular moment, in that particular, because of the work that I was doing before. Privilege. I am, though dance in America, most of my experiences and family members are either between the Caribbean, Jamaica in particular, and in Canada. I'm a Black person from Jamaica who spent most of their life, or some of their life now, in the Canadian space. That's not like a Black American. That's another set of perspective of how I experience racism, but also Blackness. Privilege. My first grant was in 2000. That grant got me to go to train in the States with American Dance Festival and Bates Dance Festival. I was 23. Mm. The next year, I was gone for 7 years because of who I met in those particular spaces that led to me working with Garth Fagan Dance. Many things opened up after that. Coming back, many things opened up because now I had American experience. Mm. Privilege. I have pretty much been funded for most of my career by taxpayers' dollars because that's what funds the arts. Let's go back and bring the capitalist conversation into it. I know of many artists in my generation who are no longer in the arts because of the hardship that they experience in the arts. So I call it as a privilege to be a nationally awarded artist, and to have that mean something on a bio or a resume is a privilege. And I think the work around understanding your privilege for me is also now, how do I begin to walk into those particular spaces, whether it's political, whether it's city, whether holding an advisory committee, arts committee, culture committee position for the city, or some of my other work on boards, TAPA, I could go on forever. I was on the Canadian Dance Assembly. I'm now on Dance Collection Dance. I see those privileges as a way of beginning to shift and change those particular organizations. So when I walk in and I start talking about my privilege, I have to understand how those privileges allow me to enact and begin to shift and change those particular organizations for which I'm privileged. I'm choreographer of the National Ballet of Canada. Can I not use that privilege? However, I walk in and say, no, I'm not choreograph. So when I sit down and draw one circle, I'm going to write first and have them go, oh my God, what? And I go, we're going to write. When you talk to your ancestors, come up with the story that we need to be talking about as I develop this work that is going to be about who we are in this moment in time, that's based, rooted in a communal way I look at how I work with my company. Those are privileges. And I think when I call my privileges, because I have to bring everyone whom have not arrived at the same sort of success or the same sort of things that I'm arriving at, like this forum right now, to discuss these things. I have to understand my responsibility to them and the privileges I have in making sure I'm bringing them along some way, call their names as I go through the process. That's the privilege I'm talking about.
That's where I see we need to get to. I think we're stuck in even being able to name privilege right now, to be able to acknowledge our privilege right now. And I think once we're able to do that, then we can move into the responsibility that we have when we do have privilege, and how you can ignore your responsibility all you want, but it's actually racism when you do that. you're not being anti-racist, you're being racist. Who else wants to talk about privilege? Natalie, I feel like you're ready to get in there. I mean, I think as somebody who is frankly obviously white passing, there's a lot of privilege there in being able to let go of the identity of being Black, or even of having people mislabel you and treat you differently because they assume that you're not Black. You want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a whole bottle of wine conversation too. You know, I do acknowledge that I am privileged. I do pass as white, especially in the wintertime. Not so much in the summer. And I can think back, you know, when I first started out many, many years ago at a theater that I will not name, but I was doing a show that is predominantly a white show. I played a young girl in it. And in the summertime, I get quite dark, and depending on the weather, my hair gets bigger and bigger and bigger, which I love. But I specifically remember the lighting fellow, the spot director, saying to me, you know, you need to stop tanning because we can't light you anymore. And I remember crying to my roommate at the time, and I remember saying, you know, I'm not tanning. This is the color that I am. I can't help it. You know, and things like that have happened throughout my career, and you know, it is a challenge sometimes because, you know, I don't fit in. I don't fit in either way. You know, yes, I pass, but you know, my brothers don't. You know, when we go on flights when we were younger, it was very obvious, you know, who got pulled over and who didn't. And it is, you know, being a person, you know, there have been times where people have said things to me not knowing my background, especially during Black Lives Matter, especially during that time. People would say stuff to me and I'm like, you know that my family's Black, right? You know that my dad's Black. I don't think you can really talk that way. Or so it's very interesting. It's I'm not white enough for many shows, and I'm not Black enough so I fit in purgatory, and that has been my entire career. Purgatory.
I mean, it's fascinating to hear you say, like, I'm too dark. And it's like, you're like the lightest. And
yeah. But you know, and that is, I mean, we've gotten better in certain companies, but that was my experience when I was in my 20s. And, you know, it has happened throughout my career. You know, it's a challenging thing. You don't know quite where you fit in.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm gonna throw it to the others on the panel who frankly can't pass.
Yeah.
And
Can I jump in? I'm jumping in.
Yeah.
I'm jumping in. I'm jumping in because there's also ways that the mainstream society co-opts all the language and then makes us think all sorts of things, right? So when we talk about privilege, I used to always say to people, if you're doing research in a Black neighborhood and I'm your researcher, then I'm the one with the privilege. So sit down with this notion that privilege is always white, because it's not. It just depends on what you're talking about. And so as the chair of the Ontario NDP's Black Caucus, the ability for me to bring an inside look, like behind the curtain look of how our political system operates to Black communities across the province is a privilege. The system doesn't want me to believe that. The system wants me to believe that I'm a Black elected official, and because of my Blackness, I am lesser than my white elected officials, but I'm not. When I go into Queen's Park and the security sees me, they best remember who I am and treat me just like they do all the other people, because that's what their job is. They have to look at the thing, they have to recognize me, and they have to allow me to not stand in line. Now, does it always happen? No. Sometimes they forget, and then I have to raise it, right? However, the point is, I still carry that privilege. Our systems make us think that even me I have 2 undergrad degrees and a master's and a PhD, that I'm still supposed to feel like I don't have privilege. But I get to go when my kids are having trouble in school and tell their teachers to call me doctor, and I do. Because sometimes I have to use my position of privilege to move the systems to ensure that my kids are safe. So I say all of that to say this. There are moments where the systems that perpetuate racism don't want to see our humanity and our privilege, but our ancestors fought for us to be able to stand with grace and dignity, with our heads held high, and to recognize who we are and our privilege, not just in February, though I'll take it. I'll take it. But 365 days in the year and 366 in the leap years, because even the leap years, you're not allowed to be racist or anti-Black for that one extra day.
Yeah.
I want to answer that.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Laura May. Yeah, I agree. I think when we think about privilege, we can think about how we live in a society that is ableist. We benefit. I know I benefit from an ableist society. I benefit from a transphobic society. I benefit from, for the most part, a cis heteronormative society and how I pass. I benefit from a colorist society because I'm light skinned. But, when I think about privilege too, in the way that I move in the world, I think about my mother and her coming here and raising me as a single mom, and English not being her first language, and having to deal with that. And because every day when I speak and I educate, people call me articulate, which is code for white professional, but anyways, but I get to use that ability of growing up here, being here since I was 2 years old. And I'm able to use that privilege to walk into spaces and be a voice of authority, where that would not happen for my mother in the same way. And so I recognize that. And that's why when I look at other Black, Indigenous, or racialized people, or in this context, Black folks who are like, I'm not speaking up, so I'm like, you go do that. I'm not trying to get the hate that you get. And I'm like, abso-freaking-lutely, because for us to assume that every person can walk into a space and speak the way that we are speaking as Black people, absolutely not. It is unsafe, and there is a lot of harm that comes with it. And I think it's recognizing the privilege to be able to do that, to be able to speak in that colonial language and be able to articulate yourself in that way, to be able to navigate those spaces and be able to do all of that, or code switch or not code switch, to be able to express in that way. So yeah, I think that privilege is absolutely at the forefront, that we can experience both racism and violence, and we can experience both privilege.
Yeah, it's so multifaceted. I think that's the part that a lot of people forget just in general about humans, is that we're intersectional, we're multifaceted, we wear many hats, we have many jobs, and just because we have one opinion about one thing doesn't take away another thing. Or I can have privilege in some sense and still experience anti-Black racism, or my political work is my activist work, is my artistic work is my, it's all part of my identity. My motherhood is part of my artistic practice, and all of that, and how we just need to be more appreciative of people for who they really are, and the values that they actually have and the things that they actually have to say. Kevin, go ahead.
I just want to say also that part of that privilege is actually separating the artistic practice from who you are. And that's white. Very white. When I walk in a certain space and people say, I just want to go in the studio and create, I go, what do you want to go into the studio and create? What are you creating? Like even that conversation about separating the art of living and creating and working in response to society, which is what art is supposed to be, from the work that you do as an artist, is even part of this whole anti-racist structure that we're talking about. Because it assumes that you're going to be creating your work in these particular contexts and framework. I'm going to go into a studio to create the work. I'm not going to work and with community to create the work. And so you have this thing of saying, okay, so you're a professional artist and you're a community engaged artist, and then you are this artist and that artist.
There's our boxes again, right? Tick, tick, tick. I see all the
Again.
little boxes for
And
you.
they're linked to capitalism and they're linked to colonialism.
Can I add
Yeah.
something real quick to that? Can I just add something real quick? I just want to say that was so dope, Kevin, because what happens, since we're talking about anti-Black racism, the way that anti-Black racism shows up in the arts is that those who, for example, are not Black, or for example, those who are white or white passing, have the opportunity to be able to move in the arts as an individual, as a person, just expressing their identity without, for somehow whiteness or who they are in terms of the way the world sees them in terms of their race doesn't have to be part of the conversation, right? They're just a human being. Like when we watch a movie or we watch a film or a TV show or a musical, we don't say, "Oh, that's a white musical." Well, some of us do, but we don't say that as a culture, right? As a people. But when we see a majority Black musical, we will say that's a Black musical.
It's a Black musical.
And so that ability, the privilege to be able to not have to have your racial identity attached to the character or the art that you're creating, so forth, is, and in fact, the way in which anti-Black racism shows up, because we can't do that as Black people. That part of our identity is always at the forefront, whether we want it to be or not. People will look at us that way.
Yeah. And I think, even when we think about it, our communities act a lot with intuition. And it's really interesting to me when I look at intuition, because we talk about our five senses. We get taught about our five senses in school. They tell us everything about that. The one thing they keep to leave out is the sixth sense that is actually most reflective and important in the work that we do in the arts. And that's our intuition. And it's guided so much of the way we use anti-Black racism and in the arts. It's guided the way we feel in those spaces that we're in. It's not always just sight, because I could walk into that room, my eyes closed, my hearing shut off, and still sense that someone doesn't like me in that space. And so I think it's really important that we start driving some of this understanding of privilege as well. And I think one place that I have been at fault at within this conversation of privilege is that I will reach a position, or let's say I speak for the city of Guelph, and I was like, wow, I'm so honored to do that. It's unbelievable. I was so lucky as this person to be granted that opportunity. And I had to reflect on what that also meant, because while I am thankful always for opportunities I have, it was, why did I feel that way? Because it must have felt that I was never belonging in that space to begin with. I have 2 degrees, I have lots under my belt, but I still felt that it was like a handout opportunity, as opposed to I just deserve that because I work in that exact same resume as that white person next to me. And I had to work on also reflecting on what privilege looks like. Privilege within my own community as a light-skinned woman, as a woman who's adopted to a white Italian Irish family while I lived with my oppressor for the first 15 years of my life. I've also been granted many more access and opportunities than most. But then on the other hand, I don't also want it to negate those moments where we should feel proud for ourselves, for getting the work that we did, for being ourselves, not because white people granted us that access.
Yes. And sorry, I'm coming in here because, yes, Queen, thank you so much.
Do it.
What?
Talk to each other.
This is why, like I said in the beginning, growing up Jamaican and arriving in this country when I was 15 going on 16 is a privilege. I can't imagine the challenge, and Lisa May is in education, the challenge of like so many second generation children now grappling with this idea of Blackness and who they are as Black people in this particular space. So me coming at the space now, me come in and me say, look here, and me know my history of Jamaica, me come from, you're not gonna tell me nothing. Meanwhile, the person beside me is like, I also come into the privilege as a Jamaican in comparison to other Caribbean countries, where when we started taught the accent, I'm saying, oh, it's so cool. It gives me, so, but I want to go back to saying this, to just simply to say that, and to link it to this idea of inclusion that we're talking about, which we shouldn't be talking about. But if I'm granted into a space where I need to show up as who I am as an artist, rest in mind, and I'll come rush me out of the space. Me now leave at 11 o'clock, come and just start. Rest in mind, when me start to play the music in the space, this is how my artistic practice manifests itself in that particular space. And I need for you to understand that. See, Miss Just my accent a while ago. I need for you to understand that, because this is the way I practice my art in the spaces I am in. But I still want to just say that that's a privilege, because there are many artists in our country who cannot walk in with that privilege to make those assertions for the work that they want to create, or what they see their company's vision is in those particular spaces.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, go off. Yes. Okay, we've got like time just happens too fast. It's so quick. We have just a couple of minutes left. I just want to give each of you an opportunity to say final thoughts, maybe offer a suggestion to our audience of something tangible they can do to be part of anti-Black racism and not be bystanders after this conversation. My suggestion is going to be Google it. Literally just Google. Like, there's so much information on Google. Just take like 3 minutes every day while you are on have your coffee, when you wake up, when you are waiting for something to get printed. Just take the 3 minutes to educate yourself about stuff. That's my suggestion. Natalie, you go.
My suggestion, hang out with little kids. Hang out with little kids. They're so open. They're so, we can learn lots. That's my suggestion. Hang out with little kids because they can teach us tons moving forward.
Yeah. Just don't teach them to be racist when you're hanging out with them.
Right.
Because they're impressionable and stuff.
That's right.
Yeah. Kevin, you go. Final thoughts, suggestions.
I use this mantra a lot with my own company and also with Sapama when we work. And it's to turn discomfort into inquiry. And that is something that comes from Liz Lerman, who I worked with, as I mentioned, at the Dance Exchange in DC. And I use it as also a way to say that I want to encourage Canadian passivity that we have to sort of dispel and to move away from that, and to really become action, to really use the activities of knowing and knowledge and inquiry to move the conversation forward, without saying, oh, it's affecting those persons over there and I don't have the power, or I don't have the ways to actually enact change. That we can be the change that we desire by standing up, by being active, and also by doing the research, so that way we're connecting it to larger histories of things that exist, like the amazing panelists of which I'm a part and work and speaking with today.
Thank you, Kevin. Laura May, final thoughts / suggestions. How can we move past racism into anti-racism today?
I want people to remember that we're at a crossroads, and that our crossroads isn't siloed from all of the other things that are happening in the world. So you can't address racism or become an anti-racist artist without also taking on other political decisions that are happening around you. And so for me, in my tradition, Eligua stands at the crossroads, and Eligua will sometimes trick you and say things to you and make you have to face your things. And so if you just give me a moment, because it's how I roll, I just want to sing a little Eligua for you to remind you that you're at the crossroads.
Ooh.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, monyale gwanya mama Kenya woe. Mbarasu hayo. Oh, monyale gwanya mama Kenya woe. Oh, barasu hayo heke shodara. Oh, monyale gwanya mama Kenya woe.
So if you remember that you're at the crossroads and that every single thing that you do is a choice, then you don't let anti-racism happen to you. You do the anti-racist work. You do it every day. You do it every morning. You do it when you shower. You do it when you brush your teeth. Every single thing is that choice. And so that's what I hope people leave with as they move from this panel.
Amazing advice.
Yes, for Eligua. Oh my God.
Yeah. Stunning. Salam, last thoughts.
Yeah. So I think, for folks that are watching, since we know, if our audience today, if it was Black folks, I would have a different message. But because predominantly our audience today is white folks, I would say that this work is not about helping Black people, right? That this is about reparations. This is about recognizing what is owed to Black folks who have been intentionally disinvested in, intentionally disenfranchised, intentionally excluded, and so forth. And so we have to start to change our thinking around that, so that we are not perpetuating, white saviorism, and that we're actually saying, when I think about anti-Black racism, or like Laura May's saying around anti-racism, how does this reflect back who you are as a person, how you move every single day? I don't need you to help me, because your identity has never actually been based on you learning more about yourself. So I want you to learn more about who you are in these systems and how you're contributing to these systems, so that reparations can happen, so that healing can happen, because none of us are free if Black people are not free, and Black people need to be free in these spaces.
Boom. Queen, you're up.
What else is there to say? No, I always have something to say. And just like, I do want to recognize, I've currently been fighting concussion symptoms since like October, like real bad. And every day's been rough. But this moment today, I've been so energized. I'm like hyped. I'm ready for a fete. I'm ready for a boat cruise. I'm ready for all the food, anybody who wants to make it for me. Because this energy is so key. And it reminds me how important this work is and why we all do this work. And as long as the world of art has been around, it's been a means for self-expression and radical system challenging. And I think someone had mentioned this, and it brings me back to that quote by Angela Davis about being radical is really just the roots of change. And I think of all of us as these kind of roots together underneath this one massive, big, beautiful 1,000-year tree that just keeps getting ripped down by colonialism, by the way, if you want to check out things happening out west. But I think of us as that roots of change. So I think for me, though, change for so many people, the opposite of uncomfortable is courage. But this work doesn't take just courage, it takes commitment. And the courage and commitment has been coming from our communities for thousands of years. It needs to come from our allies and accomplices as well. You can't just use courage and say, I've done it all. You need to show that commitment through that work, whether or not it's in racism in the arts, whether or not you go back to your workplace in the medical sector, whether or not you go back to the school. What does courage and commitment look like to you in actionable commitment?
Amazing. Amazing. I mean, I want to echo that. The energy of being together, of having so many exceptional minds come together just to have a conversation. I frankly don't think it happens enough that we're permitted to be in rooms together organizing things. And I'm really excited to have you all join me. Thank you to our audience for attending our very first event. There's many more to come in the future, I'm sure. And panel, y'all are the best, truly. Thank you, everybody. That's the end of our discussion today. Thank you for joining us, and see you later.